have German grey, which is a very dark bluish kind of grey. Got to be careful here to be patient. Put a couple of coats on. We'll be leaving the black as internal shade here. Remember that there's a lot of flat areas where you particularly want to get that grey, work it into it, so you're leaving lines. Oh, and that was a wee flash of Mrs. Panzer Schule's hair getting in the way, folks. That was a bit of a problem when we were recording. You'll see we've got a couple of solutions if you stay at the end of the video of how we're maybe going to deal with that and whether or not they were a good idea. But here we're moving around the cloak, putting a coat on, coming back, putting another coat on, and then when we're ready and we've got all the shade in place, our main coat and our shade, that is, we can then put on highlight. In this case it is just dark grey. Placing that highlight adjacent to the shades where possible, or on edges where appropriate, and that will really just help create the depth and sort of the depth that makes it pop when it's on the tabletop, and creates the shape which tells the eye, you know, what it's seeing. And there's lots of little areas around the hood here that can be picked out. Make sure that the brush, the paint, sorry, is just flowing nicely off the brush, so you get really controlled lines that are going on as thick as you want it to be. If it's too dry, it will just drag and you'll feel it dragging, and it'll look rough, you know, the paint's not coming off. If it's too wet, you'll see it just pools where you let it go. Now that can be a useful look at certain times, but it's not what we're wanting here. Here we're just wanting crisp edges. And there, the inside of the cloak as well. You can see that tattered edge to the cloak. The highlight can really pick that out. That bright edge against the dark background is really distinctive. Once again, you can see the lines for the highlight. In this case, are small. They're very noticeable because it's a light grey. It's London grey. No, it's dark grey, sorry, against that light background. And then purple. We're using game colour here. It's royal purple with purple as the main colour and magenta as a highlight. Now we've undercoated this area in black, so that black is really just to frame the area. It's not going to form much of an internal shade for the purple. If it was the German camel black brown framing the area, it would look a bit weird, you know, because the purple sits better against a black background. Just moving around the tunic, being careful just to leave enough shade, or rather in this case the undercoat colour, which is you don't want to leave too much or it starts looking too dark. Now here's the main colour going on. You can see once again painting lines, joining those lines up as required, creating the depth that you need. Sorry, it's gone a bit blue there, folks. The camera's doing that for some reason, and I've learned I need to focus on something brown and then go back, like here. The magenta's not really showing, but it is there, folks. I don't know why it's not showing. It's not a eye-popping highlight, but it is a visible highlight, and it's just been applied in the same way as you've seen the highlight being applied on the cloak. Just working around the figure. There's a nice nighttime kind of purple that's not too dark. And the gloves, once again, with a black undercoat, they have a shade colour of dark blue. That's the game colour dark blue, but any kind of dark blue will do. Then model colour ultramarine is the main colour, with model colour azure as the highlight colour. Not leaving a hell of a lot of black for internal shade here. We're relying on the dark blue. The black, once again, is more about framing the gloves against the rest of the figure. and there goes the main colour now. Once again you can see painting in lines, following the shape of the figure, joining up lines as required. It's got fingers, so very easy to follow if you get the paint on your brush right, your brush shaped right, and you know the paint is of the right consistency. Gloves don't have as much detail as hands do. You don't have to worry too much about the back of the hand with tendons and such likes. You can see the internal shade there is the dark blue. And then azure for the highlight. Applying it on edges, on high spots, and across where any shade lines, any internal shade lines might be. Now the rope is English uniform highlighted with US field drab, and Mrs. Panzer Schule is just painting little blobs here, blob 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 blob, to try and get the look of a rope, leaving lots of internal shade from that German camel black brown, and that'll hopefully get the a nice effective looking appearance of rope. Now the mask and the belt are both German camel medium brown. The mask is highlighted once again with US field drab, and the belt is highlighted with orange brown for a bit of a leathery look. We really should have painted the face before we painted the mask and the hood, to be honest, but Mrs. Panzer Schule handles it very well, as you'll see, and gets the brush right into all those recessed areas without touching the finished areas. We always find it's better to paint up out of the deeper areas of a figure, as opposed to painting down into the deeper areas of a figure. So you really need to have a wee think before you start. Think, where am I going to start with this? Sometimes the larger areas look like the most obvious, but it's the smaller areas that maybe need to be the starting point. Now here's another brown. This time it is flat earth, which is quite a saturated bright kind of brown, so it's going to still have a darker appearance, but it's going to stand out from the rest of the darker areas on the figure. And once again Mrs. Panzer Schule is painting in the lines, following the folds, creating a bit of shades where maybe it's looking a little bit flat and lifeless, putting further coats on as required, just working around the figure. And then once again we're using US field drab as a highlight here. Catching those edges. There's lots of little shapes there that can be brought out with the right highlight and just accentuating the shade. Now the pouch is green grey, highlighted with Panzer Ace's German splinter camel base. There is no shade colour on it because it's quite small, and the German camel black brown will create enough shade for what we need. Now the pouch here, I think this cork brown we used to begin with, we didn't like it. It's quite pink, to be honest, so we went back to it and used, let me think, it was German camel beige with a highlight of deck tan. You'll see that in the next stage. The scabbard for the dagger is shade colour of burnt cadmium red, then a main colour of red with bright orange for a highlight. So that's a real eye-popping kind of highlight, but it sets the red off very, very nicely, especially against the dark background. there's the highlight going on now. And we base coated that pouch, and we're using that camel beige colour and getting something a bit more appropriate and not something quite so pink. Now the larger bag at the back, because of the size of it, we don't want a lot of internal shade left from the German camel black brown, so we're starting with, once again, US Field Drab, then the main colour Old Wood with Iraqi Sand for highlight. You can see it working up from that shade colour. And then the highlight, just catching those edges, catching the folds, accentuating everything. Now the trousers, we wanted another brown, dark sort of nighttime kind of colour, so that's leather brown with a highlight of beastie brown. It's not a particularly strong highlight, but it's enough for the legs. There's not a lot happening there anyway in terms of shape. Now the boots, they've got the black undercoat, so they're now going to get a main coat of German grey. That German grey is now basically the shade colour. The black is not going to be a shade colour, it's going to be a lining colour at certain bits of the boot, you know, where it meets the leg. Otherwise it's going to be German grey followed by dark grey with a highlight of London grey. You can see just once again painting lines, finding the shape, filling in as required, leaving shade that we have identified on the way, you know, within the shape, and then the highlight just accentuating the shape and the shade once again. Now that's basalt grey with a highlight of London grey and then deck tan, and then with a very careful glaze of azure. And then we're going for a bit of another non-metallic metal look here. We've got Japanese uniform from Panzer Aces and green ochre. The highlight colour is Iraqi sand. That gives a nice sort of a golden look without going too intensively into the non-metallic metal techniques. So it's starting to come together now, looking quite dark and thief-like, but with lots going on and lots for us to see. Use off-white for the eyes. Deck tan's quite good as well. And you can see Mrs. Panzer Schule handled that brilliantly. I would have been all over the place. And now she's using game colour bronze flesh tone with a highlight of model colour flat flesh. And just working into that recessed area. And let's not forget the knee. That's a nice little point of detail. So that's it, nearly finished, folks. Nice dark complementary colours and an appropriately thief-like looking finished result. Probably noticed the hair getting in the way of the recording at times there, so we had some thought about solutions, so I came up with a couple of ideas and put them to Mrs. Panzer Schule. Option A and option B, and she was pretty clear on a preferred option. Apparently option A would result in me sleeping with one eye open for the rest of my life, so we settled on option B.